The outbreak of World War II saw multiple European countries fall one after another. As the German army turned its focus toward France, the British and French forces, deemed the strongest military power in Europe, officially entered the war. However, the Allied forces suffered a series of defeats on the battlefield, leading to over 400,000 soldiers being trapped in a narrow area by the sea, facing the threat of complete annihilation. To rescue them, the United Kingdom launched Operation Dynamo, also known as the Dunkirk Evacuation. This massive operation involved the coordination of land, sea, and air forces, and was supported by numerous civilians. Ultimately, over 300,000 soldiers were successfully evacuated, creating what is considered a miraculous escape in military history. However, due to the circumstances of the operation, ordered during a time of defeat and crisis, it was seen by many as a retreat for the vanquished. So, what were the causes and consequences of this operation? And how should it be evaluated by later generations? In this video, we will return to the perilous shores of Dunkirk to explore the details of this massive evacuation. On May 10, 1940, the German army launched an offensive to the west, attacking France and the Low Countries, sparking the Battle of France in World War II. In the early stages of the battle, the main Allied forces were lured by the German Army Group B into Belgium. Faced with the overwhelming power of the Germans, the Netherlands quickly surrendered, and Belgium's situation was also dire. However, the main assault force of the Germans was Army Group A, commanded by von Rundstedt, consisting of armored divisions that made up 70% of Germany's total tank strength, making it extremely powerful. This force forced Luxembourg to surrender without a fight and quickly advanced through the Ardennes forest into France, capturing the important city of Sedan and then crossing the Meuse River. France's defenses were wide open. Within a week of the invasion, France had no strategic reserves left and lost control of the skies. On May 16th, Army Group A continued its westward march, forming a side-like maneuver from the Ardennes Strait to the French coast, dividing the Allied forces in two. To the north, the British Expeditionary Force and the French First Army, and to the south, the main French army. This sharp side rapidly split France's territory. By May 20th, Guderian's forces captured the French seaside city of Abbeville, completing the division of French territory. From there, they planned to concentrate their efforts on destroying the remaining Allied forces. The German armored divisions advanced along the coastline toward the ports of Calais, Boulogne, and Dunkirk, aiming to prevent the Allies from retreating by sea. Meanwhile, the French Allied commanders failed to fully grasp the gravity of the situation. Whether under Gamelin or his successor Weygand, their military strategies still relied on World War I era tactics, constantly pushing the Allied forces to break through the defensive lines of Army Group A, march south to join the French main army, and engage in trench warfare in the Somme region. In pursuit of this goal, the French forces launched several offensives, all of which failed. At the same time, British forces mobilized 2 divisions and a tank brigade to fiercely counterattack the German forces near Arras. But again, no substantial breakthrough was achieved. By this point, the Allies were fighting hard in Belgium to resist the German Army Group B while simultaneously facing the tightening encirclement of Army Group A, and the situation had become extremely dire, with the risk of total destruction by the Germans. With the possibility of breaking out to the south becoming less and less likely, the United Kingdom began planning for an evacuation by sea. On May 22nd, Britain sent 2 infantry brigades to secure the ports of Boulogne and Calais. But with Guderian's rapid advance, the only remaining evacuation point was Dunkirk. By May 24th, Guderian's armored forces were just 10 miles from Dunkirk. Once Dunkirk fell to the Germans, the Allied forces in northern France would lose all escape routes. However, at this critical moment, the German strategy suddenly changed. On the afternoon of May 24th, Hitler suddenly ordered the halt of the German advance. The reasons for this decision are debated, but can be summarized into three key points. First, to protect the valuable armored units of Army Group A, which had suffered heavy losses during their long march and needed rest and maintenance. Second, the region around Dunkirk, Flanders, is crisscrossed with rivers and swamps, unsuitable for mechanized movement. If the armored divisions suffered significant losses here, the Germans would face difficulties in continuing their operations. This concern was not unfounded. 3 days earlier, the British launched a counterattack near Arras. Although small in scale, it did manage to achieve some breakthroughs. The British used the new Matilda heavy infantry tank, whose thick armor rendered the German anti-tank weapons ineffective, particularly troubling for Rommel's 7th Panzer Division. Although the counterattack was limited, many German commanders, including Rundstedt, mistakenly believed it was a precursor to a larger Allied counteroffensive and overestimated the strength of the enemy. At this point, the Germans had advanced quickly, and the armored divisions were far from their supply lines, forming a long supply chain. Rundstedt, being a cautious commander, did not want to risk sending his armored forces deeper into enemy territory without adequate support, fearing a counterattack from the British and French forces. Therefore, Rundstedt advised Hitler to pause the offensive and wait for the infantry and armored units to catch up with supplies. The second reason was overconfidence in the German Luftwaffe. Göring, the commander of the Luftwaffe, was highly trusted by Hitler and sought an opportunity to showcase the power of the Air Force. Having observed the Army's performance in France, Göring was determined to demonstrate the decisive role of the Luftwaffe in the war and solidify his position within the military. He pushed Hitler to allow the Luftwaffe to act independently. Göring promised that the Luftwaffe could completely block Dunkirk and destroy the British and French forces on the beaches, without the need for Army ground support. This overconfidence in the Luftwaffe's capabilities, combined with Rundstedt's caution, led to Hitler's decision to halt the advance. The third reason was political and diplomatic considerations. The Dunkirk battle was a crucial part of the French campaign, and when deciding whether to continue the attack, Hitler did not only consider the military aspect. He had political and diplomatic concerns as well. Hitler had a certain admiration for Britain, believing that both Germany and Britain belonged to the Germanic peoples and thus had no direct conflicts of interest. He valued Britain's global influence and hoped that it would play a role in the new Nazi order. However, if the British Expeditionary Force was entirely wiped out, Hitler feared it would provoke British resistance and push Britain to fight at all costs. Therefore, he chose to allow the British forces to retreat, sending a signal that Germany did not want to push Britain into a corner, and hoped to spark British interest in peace talks. These three reasons contributed to Hitler's decision to halt the advance. However, what Hitler and many of the German generals failed to anticipate was that this order actually provided the Allies with a crucial window of time for their retreat. At the time, the Allied forces were physically exhausted, demoralized, and on the brink of collapse. The German offensive stopped just as it was about to break through, giving the enemy a valuable opportunity to regroup. In Dunkirk, the remaining Allied forces regrouped and, with the help of the coastal defenses and the British Royal Air Force, gradually organized a large-scale evacuation. This decision is considered by historians to be one of Hitler's major strategic mistakes on the Western Front. At 6:57 p.m. on May 26th, the Dunkirk evacuation, codenamed Operation Dynamo, officially began. From the start, the situation was extremely dire. After 2 days of stagnation, the German ground forces resumed their attack, trapping the Allies between the German 6th and 18th Army groups. Due to the German artillery blockade and the need to avoid reefs and mines, the British forces had no choice but to take the longest route for their retreat, which greatly increased the risk of air attacks by the German Luftwaffe. The Dunkirk harbor, narrow and crowded, usually required cooperation between pilots and captains to navigate safely. As the evacuation began, more and more ships were hit by German bombers, making docking increasingly difficult. Additionally, The German Air Force almost destroyed all usable boarding facilities in the harbor, leaving only a small wooden dock connected to the eastern breakwater. The British forces made improvised boarding ramps from collected wood and pushed trucks into the sea to create makeshift bridges. The remaining soldiers had no choice but to board directly from the beaches, sometimes with half of their bodies submerged in the sea, and some were even soaked through before being rescued. Due to the severe shortage of rescue resources, the Allied soldiers had to abandon large weapons and equipment, taking only what they could carry. The name Dunkirk comes from the Dutch word meaning church on the dunes. Over the following days, British and French soldiers would pray for divine intervention. The first to board were non-combat personnel and paratroopers without officers to command them, leading to a rather chaotic evacuation. Officers who maintained order used foil wrappers from cigarette and chocolate packs to identify themselves with their initials, the abbreviation for a senior Navy officer, to assert their authority. Navy officers and armed sailors also joined the effort to maintain order. The troops boarding later were more disciplined, especially those embarking from the eastern pier, where they formed an orderly queue with little confusion. Of course, the retreat was neither calm nor safe. On the first day of the evacuation, the German Air Force launched 12 airstrikes, deploying 300 bombers and 550 fighter planes, which not only destroyed harbor facilities, but also heavily bombed transport ships, especially Stuka dive bombers, which dropped high-explosive bombs from low altitudes with remarkable accuracy. The Royal Air Force was tasked with protecting the ships crossing the Channel. On the first day, the Royal Air Force launched 22 waves of 287 planes, shooting down 38 German planes at the cost of losing 14 of their own. By the end of the day, the British Air Forces had lost 60% of their planes deployed in France. During the evacuation, pilots continued to risk their lives, engaging in aerial dogfights with German planes. Many battles took place above the clouds and on the approach routes of German planes, making the aerial conflict even more intense than what was witnessed from the beaches. Overall, the Royal Air Force conducted over 2,700 sorties, losing 106 planes, but shooting down approximately 140 German aircraft. This effort played a key role in securing the success of the evacuation. Prime Minister Winston Churchill later praised the Royal Air Force, stating that he wished to salute these young pilots. In addition to Dunkirk, the British Air Force played a crucial role. The soft sand on the beach acted as a protective barrier for the soldiers. The bombs dropped by German planes would first sink into the sand before exploding, and the shockwave and fragments were absorbed by the sand. Therefore, after the bombings, the Allied soldiers on the island of Wight would often rise unharmed, whereas those boarding from the harbor and rocky beaches weren't so lucky. On the first day of the evacuation, the British sent out a cruiser, 8 destroyers, and 26 other ships. This was the largest rescue effort the British government could muster at the time. As early as May 20th, Churchill had foreseen the need for a possible evacuation and had ordered ships to be assembled. The original plan wasn't to evacuate the entire expeditionary force, but to rescue a small number of soldiers who might not be able to break through. However, as the situation developed, the scale of the operation grew tenfold. The British government requisitioned all available ships, including small boats that didn't have the capacity to cross the sea. Navy warships, with their deeper drafts, couldn't approach the beach, but small boats could ferry soldiers to the larger ships. Despite this, the pace of evacuation was still slow, and on May 27th, only 7,669 men had been rescued. At this rate, it would take nearly 2 months to complete the evacuation. Therefore, the British government began calling on civilians to assist in the effort. Soon, civilians from the UK, France, and Belgium answered the call and set sail from Dunkirk in various types of boats, including lifeboats, tugboats, speedboats, fishing boats, barges, flat-bottomed boats, and yachts. These boats, despite constant air raids from the German Luftwaffe, made repeated trips between the coast and the larger ships, rescuing soldiers and pulling those in the water to safety. Churchill later referred to these small boats as the unsinkable Wens fleet, a testament to the unity of the Allied people. Thanks to the combined efforts of both the military and civilians, the pace of the evacuation significantly improved. On May 28, 17,804 people were evacuated, and the weather conditions also favored the operation. During the Dunkirk evacuation, the overcast skies, especially the thick clouds and dense fog, reduced the accuracy of German airstrikes, making it harder for the Luftwaffe to target the ships and harbor facilities effectively. The bad weather forced the German Air Force to reduce the number of sorties, which, ironically, provided the Allies with more opportunities to evacuate thousands of soldiers per hour to Britain. On May 29, 47,310 soldiers were evacuated, and on May 30, 53,823. On May 31, the number peaked at 68,014. On June 1, the German Air Force had figured out the Royal Air Force's patrol patterns, and as soon as British planes returned to base to refuel, German bombers would launch attacks. On that day, the Germans destroyed or sank 42 ships, nearly matching the total number of ships lost in the previous days. Despite the heavy toll taken by the Luftwaffe, the Allies managed to evacuate 64,429 men from Dunkirk on June 1. To minimize losses among the ground forces and the Air Force, the evacuation shifted to nighttime operations starting on June 2. Once night fell, all the ships sailed simultaneously toward Dunkirk, working through the night to evacuate soldiers. Over the next 3 days, more than 26,000 soldiers were evacuated each day. By 2 p.m. on June 4, the German ground forces had completely occupied Dunkirk Beach. Apart from the more than 40,000 French soldiers who had held the outer defense lines and were eventually captured, all remaining Allied soldiers were safely sent back to Britain. After 9 days of intense effort, the Dunkirk evacuation was completed successfully. During the Dunkirk evacuation, a total of 338,226 people were successfully evacuated, including approximately 215,000 British soldiers, 90,000 French soldiers, and 33,000 Belgian soldiers. A total of 861 vessels of various sizes participated in the evacuation, but about one-third of them were sunk. Over 40,000 Allied soldiers were captured, and more than 28,000 were killed. All artillery, vehicles, tanks, and other large equipment were abandoned. Although the Dunkirk evacuation took place under the conditions of a battlefield defeat, its significance lies in its miraculous nature in terms of the number of people evacuated, the scale, the difficulty of execution, and the ultimate success. It holds great practical and symbolic meaning. Some military analysts even argue that Germany's defeat and the liberation of Europe began with the Dunkirk evacuation. In practical terms, a vast amount of supplies and weaponry were left behind on the beaches, severely weakening the strength of the Allies, and at the time, victory seemed almost impossible. However, the value of this operation was that it preserved a large number of experienced officers and soldiers. While the British regretted abandoning the weaponry, they managed to solve their shortage of supplies through various means. Had the enemy completely wiped out the remaining forces, the losses would have been irreplaceable in the short term. Hitler's failure to launch an immediate invasion of Britain was largely due to the defense put up by hundreds of thousands of British soldiers, who, as shown in the Tiger and the Mountain defense, preserved the core strength of the army. For years later, during the Normandy invasion, the evacuated Allied forces launched their counteroffensive from the sea. Additionally, during the evacuation, the British Royal Air Force played an outstanding role, offering hope to the British public. It became evident that the British Royal Air Force's aircraft and pilot skills were on par with Germany's, which bolstered Britain's confidence in defending the British Isles from foreign invasion. In the subsequent Battle of Britain, the Royal Air Force dealt a heavy blow to the German Luftwaffe, significantly contributing to the victory on the European front in World War II. On a psychological level, the operation demonstrated to the world that the British were not merely talking resistance in the face of adversity, but were taking real action. Prime Minister Winston Churchill delivered his famous speech, "We shall fight on the beaches," acknowledging the efforts of the British military and civilians, analyzing the future situation, and inspiring the British people to unite and fight for ultimate victory. This speech gained widespread public support and became a beacon of hope during the dark period when Europe was gradually falling under Nazi control. People understood that on the other side of the English Channel, a resilient force was preparing to strike back at any moment. This event also gave birth to the Dunkirk Spirit, a spirit of mutual help and collective struggle in the face of adversity, which motivated the British and their allies to continue fighting when the anti-fascist cause seemed to be in its lowest point. As Churchill famously said, "Wars are not won by retreat, and this rescue should not be seen as a symbol of victory. But within this rescue lies the essence of victory."